Where Taft's dollar diplomacy fucks up is in China, because railroad interests are pressuring him. They say, let's build a railroad in Manchuria. Well, what's the problem with this plan? What did we promised under Teddy Roosevelt? We'd stay out, and of course Taft ignores that. You know, the railroads don't know this, but Taft knows it, and the State Department knows it, and we piss off the Japanese, the Russians, and the Chinese aren't thrilled with it either. And the only thing that stops this from becoming a war is because the company goes bankrupt, and then therefore it all falls apart. But it just ends up proving to be a huge disaster, so that's no good. So that's the end of that. And actually, this is part of the reason why that Roosevelt was so pissed at Taft, both because of that, because he broke his promise on saying they could have caused a war. He also actually, Taft went after J.P. Morgan for buying Tennessee Coal and Iron, and did, and slapped an antitrust lawsuit on him, which of course is exactly what Roosevelt had promised and wouldn't happen. And as I said, you know how Roosevelt is with promises. So if you understand why Roosevelt was so angry at Taft, who had been his friend and was so much to knock him out of politics, he took it very personally, those things that happened. Now, what ends up happening is the big thing where Taft ends up becoming where there's an issue has to do with Mexico. Now, Mexico, you know, the great writer Octavio Paz once said of Mexico, poor Mexico, you know, so far from God and so close to the United States. And there is some truth to that story. Actually, Mexico and the United States, does anybody know anything about Mexican history? Okay, sure. Okay, you've heard of Mexico, right? Okay.
I took your 101.
Okay, yeah, okay. Now, you know, Mexico and the United States are kind of, we have a relationship that is at best dysfunctional. Okay, it's like that couple, you know, that shouldn't be together, but they can't stay away from each other, and they're always just 3 domestic violence calls away from another breakup. Okay, and you know, at one time, one of them will appear on Cops. They'll say they'll cry. They'll say they'll never be back together again. And 3 weeks later on Facebook, there's new pictures of their drunken vacation in Rio de Janeiro. Okay, that's basically us in Mexico. Okay, and for you know, Mexico, when it had its first revolution, it did so based on its constitution, on the American Constitution. And there's this desire to have a constitutional government similar to the Americans, the constitutionalists, those who are interested in that. But on the flip side, Mexico tends to fall into dictatorships. And so they end up kind of running things. And so there's always this tension between how is Mexico going to be more authoritarian? Is it going to be more constitutional? And of course, you know, the United States, whenever we have a chance, which of these two governments, being that we're a constitutional government and all that, which one do we always support, you know, and put our money behind is the dictatorship. You're right, okay? Why the dictators? Because when the dictators are in charge, they often nationalize some of the governmental resources, which then we can buy monopolistic entry. Remember, during the late 19th century, we have very control with the robber baron type governments and all this. And so as a result, a lot of the businesses want to control certain segments of the Mexican government, and usually the dictators nationalize some of this stuff, and so we're actually kind of cool with the dictators when they're running. So here is this weird dysfunctional relationship. Mexico, plus, of course, they're really not happy with that whole Mexican war, we stole shit from them type of thing, okay? So for the people in Mexico who are the constitutionalists, those who like the constitutional government idea, bless you, those who admire the American government style the most hate America the most. Okay, and we who supposedly admire a certain style of government tend to support the type of government that's the exact opposite of any of our values. So that's fun. Okay,
do as I say, not as I do.
Of course, always. You know, take my advice. I'm not using it. Okay, so those are all really cool. Now here's where it gets entertaining, okay, as if it wasn't already. So during the early 20th century, Mexico had a dictator, Porfirio Diaz, who's running the country. In 1910, he's overthrown by a constitutional government under Francisco Madero. Madero's government only lasts for 3 years, and then it's overthrown by a dictator named Victoriano Huerta. Okay, now all these are on your outline, so the names won't go quite as quick. Huerta then is about to be recognized by the Taft government in the United States. Now, Huerta's government came in January of 1913, meaning that Wilson had been elected in November of 1912. but won't take office until March of 1913. Okay, but he's president-elect. Taft is a lame duck. When Wilson hears that Taft's about to recognize him, he actually gets up on a radio address that says, "We will never bargain with that butcher Huerta." And I already told you what happens when we use the word butcher. It means bombs will follow. Okay, so that kind of cut off the official recognition, and Wilson ends up putting into this idea moral diplomacy, the idea that we should go to war or do diplomacy based not on money, based not on stability, but based on supporting those people who have our similar values, meaning democracy and capitalism in terms of politics and economics. Okay.
This is where it all starts.
Yeah. Okay. So the Mexican thing was there. So he looks actually for a constitutional guy who will overthrow Huerta, and there's a guy named Carranza whom he decides he's going to back. And so he offers to Carranza. He says, "Hey, Carranza, would you like some help from the United States?" And Carranza says, "I'd love your money. I'd love your guns, but for God's sakes, keep it on the down low, okay? Because if somebody hears that the United States is supporting me, what are they going to assume I am? Another dictator, okay? We can't have that. So we help them on the down low, but Carranza begins using anti-American slogans, and Wilson's kind of like, this is not cool, okay? The whole reason I was backing you was so we could normalize relations. Constitutional, that would be nice, okay? Doesn't help if you're being, now mind you, being anti-American is a good way to get the Mexican peasantry on your side, so that seems kind of cool, but not so happy. So he begins looking for a guy in Carranza's generals who supposedly will be a better leader than Carranza in his mind. And there's one guy who pledges that he'll be super American if we'll back him and he can be the head of Mexico. Somebody who will pee red, white, and blue, okay? And the great irony is, of course, the person we offer to do this with, who's a fellow by the name of Pancho Villa, okay? Now, if you hear Pancho Villa and pro-American in the same sentence, normally your head explodes, okay? Well, what happened? Well, we promised Pancho Villa would help him out, and he was getting all excited, but then Carranza overthrows Huerta and takes over the government. Once Carranza takes over the Mexican government, he tones down the whole anti-American thing. He was only using it in order to get into office. And once he's in there and he seems to implement constitutional reforms, Wilson recognizes Carranza as the legitimate government. Well, that's all well and cool, but who does that leave out of the picture? Pancho Villa, who's pissed. Okay, that was supposed to be his Mexico, damn it. Okay, and so Villa, who is a general, I mean, he's often, if we hear about Pancho Villa, we think of him as like this Wild West villain or a bandito or whatever. Okay, that's part of the propaganda that's placed in a certain context, because Villa is a cunning politician. He recognizes he needs to separate the United States from Carranza's government so that money won't go in anymore, and he needs to get the Mexican peasants on his side so he can overthrow Carranza. Best way to do this? Attack the United States. It's like a Mexican dream come true. You know, smack them down, get some revenge and all this. So he attacks the United States. Now, if we had contextualized this as saying a Mexican general has attacked the United States, what would that effectively be? A declaration of war, okay? But of course, you know, Wilson doesn't want it. He knows what the whole story is. So instead, he characterizes him as instead a criminal, a bandit, a Wild West villain. Okay. Now, mind you, we don't send the Pinkertons after him. We send the army, General Pershing, actually. We don't catch Villa, but Villa ends up running off into Mexico and ultimately escapes. He eventually makes nice with Carranza, kiss, kiss, everything's done. Okay. Until, of course, Villa is eventually assassinated, and that's the end of the story. Okay. Although, well, not entirely the end, because eventually he gets played by Antonio Banderas in the movie. So that makes it all better. Okay. Yes.
How long after did he get assassinated?
Oh, I actually don't remember. I'd have to look it up. It's actually a while. I mean, he does live for a while. I mean, it's there, but it was. And I'm trying to remember. It had to do with being up. It wasn't a car bomb, but he was outside his car in his Villa somewhere, and there's a whole story behind it. I used to know it.
Villa's Villa?
Yeah, I know. Villa's, and Pancho Villa's not even like his real name. He's had like a name he's known by, but anyway. I'm trying to do this as very quickly as possible since we're boom, 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 boom here, so I apologize.
Wasn't there a woman spy involved?
Huh?
Wasn't there a woman spy involved?
Probably. There always is, isn't there? You know?
Mata Gomez?
And so, yeah, the yellow rose of Mexico. Anyway, so That's only funny if you know the story supposedly behind the Yellow Rose of Texas, but never mind. Okay, anyway, so this